Hey everyone, thank you so much for tuning into my video. I want to talk about what we are doing in the midst of the process. What's going on, what we doing in the midst of God's process. So in my previous video, we talked about what God's timing looks like. How much time does God need? So time is just a tool that God uses to fulfill his will on this earth. He got multiple ways, different strategies, different processes that we all may be in different places at whatever given time. But while we in the process, what are we doing? What does that look like to be in the middle of God's process? So I want to use Abraham, the story of Abraham, and I'm starting at Genesis chapter 12. And so in Genesis 12, God had just came to Abraham and told him to leave the land and go to a place that he would show him. Stop there. That proves to me that Abraham already had a relationship with God and trusted and knew God's voice. He knew God's vision, dream, however way God may make himself known to Abraham. Abraham trusted and knew that those instructions were coming from God. So it was already a relationship there. So Genesis 12, it shows us God came to Abraham and told him to leave. Now, backtrack to Genesis 11. Abraham's father had just died. His father had just died in chapter 11. And so also that proves that Abraham had an assignment connected to his father and connected to the land that they were in. So Abraham was 75 years old at Genesis chapter 12 when God came to him and told him to leave. So for 75 years, Abraham has been building a relationship with God and following the instructions of God and fulfilling the assignments that God was giving him over these years, over 75 years. So what's happening in these processes? What are we doing? We are building relationships with God. We are learning to hear his voice. We are trusting his decisions, his instructions that he given us. We are learning how to trust that and walk in faith. Because God told him, leave and I will show you where you are going. He never told him beforehand where he would be leading him to. And so that's faith. That is faith. That's a really strong faith that we are building and growing while we are in a process of God's will being manifested. So Abraham, he's building a relationship. He's walking in faith with God. So he leaves in chapter 12. And we get to chapter 13, he stops in the land that he was in and he builds this altar to God and call upon God's name. Meaning he's checking in with God, asking like, God, am I on the right track? Give me some confirmation here. I let him know I still serve and worship you. You know, reassurance, letting God know I'm still here with you and asking God, are you still here with me while I'm on this journey? Chapter 14, we see Abraham had to go to war. He had to go into a major, huge fight. Like, you can imagine how horrific timing was to have to go to war, violence. You know, that's never a good thing. But in the process, these are hard times that Abraham has to deal with and he's dealing with. And he went to war. He had to go get his son, his nephew, Lot, that he had been snatched away in a previous situation, a previous war. So Abraham had to go get his son, nephew, Lot, get him back. And so he also made it known after he, won the war, he made it known that no, I will not take any of their things. I have already, made a promise to God, or God made me agree to not take any of these people's things or whatever. And at that point, Abraham is honoring his side of the agreement between him and God, and the Melchizedek, or whatever the highest priest name is. We can't pronounce all them names. I can't pronounce all them names in the Bible, right? But the highest priest came and met Abraham, and it was like this huge celebration and honor bestowed upon Abraham for keeping his side of the agreement, coming out of war. So like being in a process can mean war, it can mean violence, it can mean some really hard times. Now, of course, we read in the Bible, it's like chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, but these are seasons, can be seasons of hard, drastic, hurtful times, but that's in God's process. You're still in God's process. So we move on to chapter 15, and we see that Abraham was like, okay, God, promised me that I'm going to be, have a mighty nation, but I don't have my own child. So we see we see Abraham making requests of God, still in the midst of God's process. He's making requests of God, and God is answering, giving him the confirmation he needs. Like, I got you. Well, I'm sorry, I'm paraphrasing, but like, I will give you that child. I will give you the promised son. And then he continued on to let him know, like, Abraham, I am your shield, I am your protection, I am your Lord, I got you. So that was chapter 15. We get to chapter 16, we see Sarah and Abraham take matters into their own hand and decide to have the son Ishmael by another woman. So that's us. We in the middle of the process, and we feel like sometimes like, okay, God, I'm gonna go ahead and do this myself. I'm assuming you want to, like, we start doubting what God said, and we take matters into our own hands, and we create situations that, God did not intend in the process. So these are the things that's going on in the process. We get to chapter 17 or chapter 18. God come back, let them know, like, I told you I was going to give you a son, and within a year from now, you will have that son. So God's promise is manifesting in the process. So all of these things are going on in the process. We go on to chapter 20. I'm off right now, but I want to say like chapter 20 or chapter 22. 20 or 22, somewhere in that area. We go there, and Isaac, God tests Abraham and tell Abraham to take his son Isaac up for an offering. And so Abraham he did what God told him to do. He gathered his things, he gathered his son, and they went off onto the place where God told him to bring Isaac to be an offering. And so God is testing you while you in the process. So all of these things are happening in the process. We're not just sitting here doing anything. We are living life. We are trying to figure this thing out. And we are trusting God, and we are praying to God, and we are, as we talking to God, we are listening so we can hear him talk back to us. We looking for God. In Genesis chapter 18, God has showed up in man form. He showed up. He didn't come through a dream, through a vision. He came directly to Abraham face to face, in man form. So we always looking for God, to trace God in all that we are doing while we are in the process. So again, what's happening while we're in the process? Let's kind of like summarize it all up, right? So we are living a life of righteousness that God can already either choose us or can use us in the perfect time. So we live in a life of righteousness. We building our relationship with God. We know his voice when we hear it. We are following his instructions when he give them to us. We are walking by faith when he tell us to move, go, and I'll show you when you get there. We're walking by faith. We are encountering hard times and dealing with the most difficult situations, and trusting that God is telling us, like, okay, go, you can go pursue this person, or you can pursue this battle. I will make you victorious in that situation, pretty much. We are trusting that we are hearing him correctly, and then we are stopping to honor and worship and reverence him. Building altars is what Abraham would do. He would build the altars, and he would go and call upon God, just sit and be with God and dwell with him. And then we're going to make mistakes. Chapter 16, we get to a place where we making mistakes, but we keep going anyway. God he's covering us anyway. We get to chapter 20 something where God, he's now testing us to make sure that we still following his instructions, no matter how much you love that thing, that child, that spouse, that no matter how much you love it, you are still following God's instructions and orders, and fulfilling God's will for your life here on earth. So it's a lot, but this is all that's happening while we are all in this process. Like, while we are all in the middle of this process, a whole lot is going on. But one thing for sure, we are dependent on God. We are leaning on God. We are trusting God. We are surviving off the breath, the life, the words of God. That's what's happening while we are in this process. Tried to make this video short. Let that resonate with you. Let it resonate in your soul. And just let it just flow, because we think that God's process means a perfect life and a life with no issues and a life with no problems, and that's completely opposite. God's process and God's will is every day, the day-to-day issues, the good and the bad, the ups and the downs, the grief and the joy. That's all part of God's process. Stop it here. Thank you so much for tuning in to my video, and I'll see you in the next video.